Well, Midsummer. Where do I start? Alright, first up, I'm quite late to reviewing this movie for two reasons. The first of which is the fact that this movie didn't come out until like the first week of August in Australia. So we were already running way behind. The second reason was because I've been revamping my studio space. Just a reminder, it is not yet done. But because I have been revamping this space, I haven't had a chance to review it. And look, we'll throw in a third reason. I didn't know if I wanted to review this movie. It's not because I didn't love it. I really loved it. I don't want to get that wrong. But it is a very difficult movie to talk about. So I'm gonna do my best. So Midsummer is the second feature film from writer-director Ari Aster, who last year did the absolutely incredible Hereditary, one of my favorite horror film of last year and one of my favorite horror films ever. I absolutely adored that film. So the fact that he followed it up within a year with Midsummer, which I believe is, I love it just as much. That is incredible to me. This film stars Florence Pugh, who you guys might be aware of. I am a huge fan of. I absolutely love what this woman is doing right now. She's one of my favorite actresses today. It also stars Reynor, William Jackson Harper, and Will Poulter. And the story basically follows this boyfriend and girlfriend, and the girlfriend has gone through some very recent, very traumatic grief and has decided to accompany her boyfriend, her mildly supportive boyfriend, and all of his friends on this weird kind of trip to Sweden where they're staying with this commune celebrating Midsummer. And if that doesn't sound like a setup for a horror film, it's because it is not a conventional one, and this is not a conventional movie. The first thing I want to get into with Midsummer, and I guess just the films of Ari Aster so far in general, is that his horror films don't play by normal filmmaking rules. The ideas of setup and payoff. There are those elements in there, and when they're done in a way that I really love. But his films almost have, I don't want to say a stream of consciousness feel, but they have a feel where they kind of go from one thing to the next, and then this happens, and then this happens, and they always have this feeling of spiraling out of control. And I get for some people, that might seem like a writer who doesn't have control of anything he's doing, and I can't say for sure whether he does or not, but I love his approach to telling these horror stories. Both of these films he has done so far, and in particular Midsummer, feels like this odyssey through the mind of someone who's just tripping out and making the most bizarre, deranged, I guess in this case, analysis of grief possible. It really is just this film that spirals and becomes more and more strange as it goes on. And yes, it's grotesque, and yes, parts of it are outright terrifying, but it becomes more about putting you in a trance and locking you in this state of pure unease. I love that his horror films are so much less focused on the jump scare. I don't know why I said that like that, but they're so much less focused on that than they are on really creating this deep sense of like nervousness, of anxiety, of impeding kind of terror. And I think that's where Midsummer succeeds so spectacularly. It's just hard for me personally to review a film that's so much about how it connects with you personally on a primal level. I can't really relate this to how I think you guys are going to feel or might have felt if you've seen it already, because I just don't know. All I know is the visceral way that I responded to this movie. And this movie really had me in its claws from the second it started. This has to be this movie's got to have my favorite opening scene of the year. The first 20 minutes of this movie are operating at a level of sheer batshit craziness that I can barely even fathom. This movie has one of my favorite opening scenes of all time, or opening sequences, because it's quite an extended bit. And I probably feel like the rest of the movie managed to hold at that level while never surpassing it. Like that first 15 to 20 minutes, what the hell? How is it that insanely good? The way it sets up the story thematically, because that's what the opening of this film is doing. It's focusing on making sure we understand what the thematic journey we're going to go through in this movie is, where the characters are at, and where the film is going to push them to by the end of the movie. It's all about setting that up. And the way it did it, some of the most striking horror imagery I have ever seen. There's certain shots in that first 20 minutes that are just absolutely eye-melting and they're like imprinted onto my brain. There's certain images that I'm gonna see in my nightmares for the rest of my life. The cinematography in this movie is by Paul Pogorzelski. Once again, he also did Hereditary. This guy does stuff with light that... What dimension is he operating in? Because he creates, like, horror movies are always about playing with light and shadow and darkness and, you know, hiding things in the dark. But the stuff that he and Ari Aster do together is phenomenal. I mean, aside from the opening of this movie, this is a horror film that is set exclusively in pretty much daylight. Like 80% of this movie is set during the day. The film is basically working against itself in order to be scary, and yet it still, for me, succeeded at that. Every shot lingers for an uncomfortable amount of time. Everything is played at a distance. The framing and composition is off the charts. You just start to notice things happening in the back of frames, or sometimes you're just forced to stare at something difficult to watch front on. This is honestly like a frenzied film, and that's kind of how I feel talking about it. The film puts me in a frenzy watching it because the filmmaking so often is completely overwhelming. And the reason it's able to get there, I think, is because of the performance that anchors this film, the performance at the core by Florence Pugh. Honestly, this character does have kind of a lot of ingredients that you see in other horror films, even in Hereditary from last year. We have a grieving central character who is once again kind of put through this emotional ringer, kind of forced to face up to those things and deal with them. And the way Florence Pugh handles that is just phenomenal. She has a face that expresses so much, such a broad range of things, even when her character, I guess, is feeling almost emotionally kind of broken, emotionally absent. There's still so much that comes through, and the rest of the cast really, really brings it, particularly Will Poulter, who's someone who, since seeing him in The Revenant in 2015, I've grown a massive respect for. He was fantastic in Banter last year, the interactive film on Netflix, and he really here plays a wonderful character, this really excitingly horrible, terrible person, and he just fits into this cast so well, and it's a great group that really, I think, bring out the best of each other together despite there being a lot of, conflict. There's not a lot of camaraderie here between these characters. It's mainly kind of tension and conflict. And yet, when you put them all together, it all worked in a way that I absolutely loved. The score by Bobby Krilic is equally bizarre and weird and erratic and I guess just endlessly strange. And I again think that really aids in that kind of euphoric state the film put me in. This is essentially a breakup movie exploring the toxicity of one very specific relationship while saying some rather broad things about grief and the way that we handle that. And it's all set in this weird Swedish commune where characters are pretty much tripping balls the entire time, and then somehow Ari Aster has made that in broad daylight terrifying and unsettling, and he's managed to once again sear some incredibly horrific images into my brain, and he's done it in a way that's very colorful and vibrant. So amidst the horror, there's a lot of things that I guess it's just weird seeing a movie where there's so much in it that we usually associate with joy being kind of pushed into the darkest places possible. And I think what we're seeing here is a horror director who doesn't play by the horror rules, who kind of does his own thing, who makes movies that feel like they're kind of making it up as they go along. And I get that that's not for everyone. I get that these are not really movies that are all that accessible. But for me personally, I love that he's playing in this particular space and making movies like MIDSOMMAR. So those are my thoughts on MIDSOMMAR. Have you seen it yet? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you like this video? Well, of course you did. You can subscribe to Breaking Banter down there somewhere, as well as my other channel, Loverboy, over there somewhere. You can follow me on Twitter at LoverboyMedia. And if you really want to help support this channel, you can support on Patreon. I want to thank you guys that are already supporting on there so much for doing that, because you guys have allowed me to upgrade this studio and continue to upgrade it. Some new things coming in over the next month to actually make it look not only brighter, but better. So I want to thank you guys so much. I want to thank everyone that watches these videos. I'm going to be back to uploading a whole lot more now, which I'm very excited about. And I guess I will see you all in the next one.